There are approximately 7,000 languages spoken in the world today, but we all know of languages that are no longer spoken anywhere by any community. There are no villages, towns, or countries where people speak Gothic, or Ancient Egyptian, or Barbareño. These languages are dead, and this section of the lecture, we're going to discuss how languages die. A language dies when the community to use it shifts completely to the use of another language, and it is the last community in the world to use this language. Language death is rarely sudden and all-encompassing, although that can happen too. Most of the time, languages die after multiple smaller communities gradually shift to other languages, one village, one town, one valley at a time. But some languages do not really die. They do not disappear completely, but rather evolve over time into other languages. Latin, for example, evolved into a variety of modern Romance languages: French, Spanish, Italian, Romanian, Romansh, Occitan, and so on. Ancient Greek evolved into modern Greek, but the differences are so significant that Ancient Greek is not intelligible to a modern Greek speaker, because modern Greek developed from the Demotic dialect spoken in the Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantium, in the 15th century. And there was 1,000 years, more than that, between Ancient Greek and the Demotic dialect. Modern English is also quite different from Old English, and the same can be said about most languages. They are not spoken the way they were 1,000 years ago. But many, many languages have become completely extinct, hundreds if not thousands over the course of human evolution. For example, Gothic became extinct in approximately 900 CE. We do have multiple documents written in it, so we can study it quite thoroughly, but nobody speaks it. Lepontic became extinct before Current Era. It was spoken in the area that is now northern Italy and Switzerland. Its existence is known only from a few inscriptions on vases and funeral steles. Cornish became extinct when its last native speaker died in the 18th century, but it had some minor success in revitalization. In 2008, approximately 3,500 speakers were documented. They vary in their levels of proficiency, but about 500 to 600 people claim Cornish as their main language, and some families are trying to raise their children using Cornish as their native language. As alluded to a few minutes ago, how a language dies varies from one historical and social situation to another. The most common type is gradual death. It involves a slow and gradual replacement of the ancestral language by another language. A prolonged, often multiple generations bilingualism is typical of this death. Think of the Cornish language, Carnabec, we mentioned just a minute ago. This Celtic language was first recorded as spoken in the area of the British Isles called Cornwall in the 5th century CE. It is not until the late Middle Ages and the beginning of the Renaissance that consistent efforts at assimilating the Cornish people, began to take place, but the language persisted in speech and in poems, folk tales, personal letters, and translations of biblical texts until its last purported native speaker, Dorothy Pentreath, died in the late 18th century. The language thus died very slowly over the course of over 1,000 years. The next type of language death is sudden. There is no intervening period of bilingualism. The last speaker is often monolingual. Such extinctions happen due to natural disasters, devastating epidemics, or genocide. Sudden death was the fate for many Native American languages after the beginning of the European colonization. Radical death is similar to sudden death, but the speakers do not all die in a catastrophic event. Rather, a community chooses actively to stop using the language, often as a mechanism of self-preservation. For example, The Salvadoran Lenca language essentially died after the massacre of nearly 50,000 indigenous people in El Salvador in 1932. The survivors, who could only be identified as indigenous if they spoke their languages, chose to abandon both their languages and their customs and blend in with the Spanish-speaking society. Finally, bottom to top death is a special case of language death. This is when the language dies in common everyday use, with a shift to a more dominant language or due to the natural diachronic changes in the language. But the original ancestral language survives for religious, cultural, or ceremonial practices. This is exemplified by Old Church Slavonic, for example, which is only used in some Orthodox services in Eastern Europe. But nobody speaks it in their daily life. Pali, a language that originated on the Indian subcontinent and died out everywhere by the 18th century, is also an example of such a language. It remains the sacred language of Theravada Buddhism, but people do not speak it in daily life. Languages, however, do not have to die. They can be maintained if the communities speaking them choose to do so, and if these communities have a larger societal support. That is not easy. To maintain a language, members of the community have to continue to use it despite institutional, economic, social, and possibly demographic factors. Languages like Arizona Tewa, Navajo, and Maori have been maintained and revitalized with incredible investments of community engagement and activism. Languages on the brink of extinction have been revitalized with some success, sometimes lesser and sometimes greater, to include Welsh, Hawaiian, and Cornish. Maintaining languages is hard. Over the course of human history, thousands of them have become extinct. One might argue, rightfully so, that language death is a natural process. So is it worth trying to save endangered languages? And if yes, why? Well, first of all, the rate of language death has accelerated since the age of exploration and colonization. From the 1490s to 1990s, half of the world's languages have become extinct. Linguistic diversity and a result cultural diversity are continuing to decline. We're becoming too much of a melting pot by all melting together. Out of approximately 200 Aboriginal languages of Australia, only 50 had viable communities in the year 2000. By 2016, the total number was reduced to 160, with only 13 spoken by children, and only 5 had more than 1,700 native speakers, but none had more than 4,300 speakers. Just for comparison, 4,300 speakers is approximately 15% of the number of undergraduate students enrolled at Cal Poly Pomona. In 2005, a large number of Navajos reported no functional proficiency in the language of the ethnic group, Dene. In 1980, approximately 93% of Navajos spoke Dene, but by 2010 the percentage declined to 51%. This is a drastic drop. Language shift and language death are on the increase. The late linguist Michael Krauss, who worked in the study and preservation of endangered languages, estimated in 1992 that 90% of the languages spoken in the world at that point would be lost by the end of this 21st century. His unfortunate prediction seems to be ready to be fulfilled. In 2020, 40% of the world's 7,117 languages had fewer than 1,000 speakers, and half of the world's population spoke only 23 languages. That leaves 7,094 languages for the remaining half, clearly a disproportional divide. When a language dies, we lose a unique culture and perception of the world. We lose a historical perspective, a rich cultural memories. and those are worth preserving. With careful language planning and active maintenance and revitalization engagement, we can stave off these losses. In the next section of this lecture, we will discuss what language planning is and how it works, and touch upon how it can be used to preserve endangered languages.